Okay, welcome to the third state preschool workshop. We're happy to have you. Glad to see that we're having so many join us virtually this time. Hopefully next year we will be able to do our regional workshops, but we're happy to have you. Let me refresh this real quickly. My internet is struggling a little bit today, so here we go. Okay. Just some housekeeping today. As you can tell, we have 128 participants in this training so far, and we'll probably go up to that since we have 200 plus people registered. So please make sure to just be aware of your webcam. We'd love to have it on so we can see your faces and get that nonverbal feedback, but we also understand when there is bandwidth issues. And also just be aware we don't want it to be distracting. So if you're walking around your house, please just make sure your camera is off. We're going to ask that you all remain muted unless we ask you specifically to unmute. So feel free to enter all your comments and thoughts into the chat or questions. And then if we need more clarification on those questions, we'll ask you specifically to unmute. But with 100 plus, 200 plus participants, it can get really noisy with that microphone. So please be aware of that. Again, utilize that chat box. And then today, limit distractions as much as you can. I know many of you have kids at home. I'm doing at-home learning, but as much as you can, limit distractions so that you can benefit from the great professional development we have today. So we have a Google folder like we do every year. You can access it by going to the bit.ly PS Workshop 21. Or you can scan the QR code with your phone or device. You'll find the agenda and links document, presentation materials, session descriptions as well. And then I will throw in the early learning standards and preschool infographic in those folders as well, just for your reference. The PDF documents that I sent out prior to this week, I've learned the links were kind of hard to click on for the Zoom links. So if you go to the Google Sheets that we have posted in the chat, as well as in this folder, those should work a little better for you. Okay, and just a quick overview of today's schedule. So we'll have our keynote with our wonderful Cheryl Ellsworth from 9 to 10. Then we'll have 4 breakout room sessions with a lunch from 12 to 1. And then make sure that you come back to this room at the end of the day from 2:50 to 3:15. We'll just do some closing remarks, a survey, and some giveaways from Lakeshore, which will be great. I just wanted to take a second and talk about the Utah Preschool Listserv. So this is fairly new. We've started it in the last year or so. We really just want to find a way that we can communicate with all preschool professionals around the state. So if you have not joined our preschool listserv, I encourage you to do so. You can go to the link that's listed there. I'll also put it in the chat for you to click and self-enroll. But you also can sign the QR code and it'll take you there. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind signing up, we just send things out at least monthly. We have a newsletter and then any other great resources that come about. So wanted to make you aware of that. And then I just wanted to take a second to give a big thank you to everyone that's helped us with this workshop. All of the USBE staff that's helped, Teresa Judd, Jamie Robinson, Jared Leesenby, Alex Farad, Jerry Record, Sheryl. Thank you guys all for helping. And for our moderators and presenters that have come, as well as Lakeshore. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but we have been able to do this workshop for 3 years now, almost completely free. This year, completely free, which is really amazing. So thank you guys all for all the presenters for donating their time and the moderators as well in order to bring you guys this great PD. And with that, I will turn the time over to Sheryl. She's our family engagement specialist at the agency. And she's presented at the Brigham City workshop last year, but she's amazing. And And we're so excited to have her. So I will turn the time over to her.
Thank you so much, Jessica. My name is Cheryl Ellsworth, and I'm really happy to be here with you all. At the very beginning, for those of you who got on before me, I was talking to Jessica and I was like, I really hope I did this right, because I want this to be a meaningful time for all of you. I want this to be awesome. But I also know that some of you heard me speak last year at Brigham City. I tried to make some things different. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Jessica, there is a little bit of feedback fuzz. Can you hear that?
I can hear it, but I don't see any other mics. I'll see if Alex will work on it and see what we can do. Maybe just turn your mic on and off for a second and see if that helps.
Yep, it's not me.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, it's off now. Okay. I just know the way that I present, that would be really hard for me. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right. So I am just really happy to be here, like I said. And by way of introduction, my name is Cheryl Ellsworth. I do work at the Utah State Board of Education, and my job is the Family Community Engagement Specialist. A lot of times people ask, okay, so what exactly do you do in your role? In my role, I share next and best practices. I vet a lot of different family engagement practices that come my way. So if I share them with you, it's because I know that it has worked for many groups of people, many teachers teaching all grades and age ranges. I train educators on evidence-based strategies, namely home visits. I will talk a little bit about home visits today and what that looks like. I also give TA support for local education agencies who receive a risk score of a 4 or a 5 on the Indicator 8 parent survey for special education. So families who have a student with a disability receive a survey, and if an LEA isn't really supporting families like they should, this survey tells me, and I give support to those different LEAs. And the final thing is I'm a mother of a preschooler. This week, actually, my child started preschool. So here he is. So this whole thing today is really near and dear to my heart. I'm actually going to share an experience I had with his preschool today with you all that I hope will help you recognize like some of the things that you can do to better engage families. And so with that, I want us to have a common definition of what I mean when I say family engagement, because I think people hear that word, but they don't always know exactly what that means. The definition we use at the State Board of Education comes actually out of the state of Connecticut. The definition that I have found really touches my heart and really shows the work that we're trying to do. Reads, family engagement is a full, equal, and equitable partnership among families, educators, and community partners to promote children's learning and development from birth through college and career. Okay, so I know there are many of us on this call today, but I actually would love it if we could get about maybe 3 people who would be willing to unmute themselves and talk about, looking at this definition, what stands out to you about this definition?
I just think it's awesome that the goal is to go from birth through college and career.
Yep. when I say that this family engagement work is not just for elementary school, which I get that a lot, like, does this even work in secondary? And then when I hear, is it really that important to engage families as early as, our babies? The answer is absolutely. We've actually learned from local research that when families are better engaged in preschool, they have more confidence to be better engaged in elementary, middle, high, and afterwards, whatever college and career work that they do. Another person, what stands out to you?
For me, what stands out is how it says equal and equitable, because there's equality and there's equity, making sure that each family has what they need because everyone's different. So I just love that that's included in there.
Jillian, I love that you actually really understand that definition of equal versus equitable. Just for those of you who maybe struggle with understanding the difference, I want you to think about, as we're like in this winter season right now, the equal part is that all of our babies need hats, coats, gloves, whatever to keep them warm, right? That is true, but a 2-year-old size is different than a 5-year-old size, right? So a 2-year-old is going to need a hat, coat, gloves that are a different size than a 5-year-old. So the equitable part is that we are going to do family engagement that really fits a family's need. That feels overwhelming sometimes for our educators. Like, how do I really get to know all these families? So we're going to talk about how you can do that in a minute. One more thing that sticks out to you. One more volunteer, please.
Mine was that it's families, educators, and community partners. It's not just the teacher and the parent. It's not between the teacher and the child. It's the whole community that supports and uplifts.
Everybody. Thank you so much, Ellen. I really appreciate you recognizing that we've got to draw in our different stakeholders and make sure that everyone is involved, because really it does take, that village mentality to raise our children. When we're looking at family engagement in school improvement, I want us to see this right here. It shows that family engagement is connected to school improvement. And what I mean by that is there was some research done out of Chicago years ago at this point, where they were looking for the key predictors for school improvement. They recognize that a school leader is very important, a strong school leader. If teachers have strong capacity, safety and order is happening at the school, and there's curriculum alignment. But they recognize that there also needed to be engagement of families. And when any of these are left out, as you can see, the blue line shows when all are there, how much a school can improve. It's a strong improvement. But here, the purple line shows if you leave out any of these components, then school's chance of improving is less than 10%, okay, or about 10% or less. So when we're thinking about family engagement, I want us to really think about what are those prerequisites that need to be in a school for effective family engagement. I want you all to know this last name, MAP. MAP with the 2 P's. This is Dr. Karen Mapp out of the Harvard School of Education. She is an expert when it comes to family engagement. Back when Secretary Duncan, Arnie Duncan, was the Secretary of Education, he just said, we need to start getting some common language with family engagement nationwide. And obviously from state to state, they can figure out what family engagement needs are there. So she's done a lot of work to really get us on the same page in this work. So let's take a look at what she has to say.
So I've thought a lot about sort of the three essential pieces that I think are going to move family and community engagement forward, sort of what practitioners, educators, policymakers, all of us need to be thinking about. And so the first thing is that we've got to understand that the commitment to family engagement has got to be a very high priority in any district's work. I think where we've struggled in the past is that districts have felt like family engagement or engaging the community is an add-on, that what we do is really teaching and learning, and this family engagement piece really comes later. Well, we now know that it's actually a part of teaching and learning practice. And so I think that the piece around family engagement proficiency, skills and knowledge of educators, that has to be elevated. So it can no longer be looked at as an add-on. The second piece is that we have to realize that in order to get there, that we need to provide training. And so this is where the PD, the professional development series, really comes in. And we have to provide training to our staff in order to be effective partners with families. And then finally, I think we have to shift our mindset. I think we've seen, again, families as sort of this entity that we keep at arm's length, that we pacify them with spaghetti suppers, and we keep them sort of on the boundaries. But we have to understand that our families are really co-producers and co-creators of effective school systems. They are our true partners in this enterprise. And without them, we're never going to be able to truly, truly have effective schools. And so those are the things that I think are really important to this work.
Okay. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that video, and every time I see it, I still get out my notebook and pen to write down some thoughts that I have, because it really helps me to take this work that I'm trying to do as a state and really try to push you as teachers, school leaders, to think about family engagement. So I really appreciate that she said that this is a high priority in a district, or in your cases, a facility, a school's work that is a part of teaching and learning. I love that Jessica is housed under teaching and learning at the State Board of Education, but she pulled me from Title I in special education and say, hey, can you do this conference or this workshop on family engagement at the preschool level, because it needs to be part of your work, even with our little babies, that you all need to be provided training. So if there's something that you're like, okay, our educators are coming to the space knowing how to teach our babies, but they're not doing a great job with really engaging with families, provide training. And then lastly, that families are co-producers in effective school systems. I love that, because we have to feel like a part of that. And I again take this work very personally, having had a preschooler recently start, or a child recently start preschool. I'm looking now through the lens of a parent, like, okay, are they engaging me? Do they really care about what I have to say? So I want to introduce you to a few family engagement frameworks that can maybe help you to think about what your particular system can do to engage families better. So this one comes from the U.S. Department of Education. This framework says that high impact family engagement is based on three things: that family engagement should be relational, it should build the capacity of families and staff, and it should be linked to learning. So if you look at this screen right here, this piece right here in the blue circle, this is higher impact forms of family engagement. We're not going to dive too deep into it right now, because we're going to actually touch on this a little bit later, but I want to introduce this to you. So the second framework is the dual capacity framework for school partnerships. This again was work done by Dr. Karen Mapp with a lot of other partners, and recognized that there were challenges both educators and families were facing when it came to true school partnerships. And then there needed to be essential conditions that educators had, essential conditions for families, policy and program goals, and hopefully capacity outcomes, that educators are empowered to connect with families, engage families, honor families, create welcoming cultures, and families engage in diverse roles as co-creators, supporters, encouragers, monitors, advocates, and models. So let's take a look at this a little bit more so that you understand, is the dual capacity framework something that we want to dive into more at our school?
The first version of the dual capacity building framework for family school partnership was launched at the 2014 Family and Community Engagement Conference held by the Institute for Educational Leadership. This research-based framework was authored in collaboration with the United States Department of Education and published by the Southwest Educational Development Lab. The framework was created to offer a tool for educators, policymakers, families, and community members to understand what's needed to cultivate and sustain partnerships between home and school that support student achievement and school improvement. Since 2014, I've gathered information from current research and from stakeholders about what was useful and what improvements were needed to the framework. Stakeholders suggested that they wanted the new framework to reflect a sense of growth and improvement, and that educators and families come together by building the capacity of each side to work in deeper partnership. Second, the framework needed to more clearly articulate the challenges that got in the way of partnership between families and educators. For example, the new framework points out that many educators have not been exposed to excellent practice, and that's often because they simply haven't received any training in this area. Many families haven't been exposed to excellent practice either, and many have had negative experiences in school, both when they were children and as adults. The way forward starts.
Cheryl, I'm not sure if you can see the comments, but the sound just got really quiet for everyone.
I'm sorry?
The sound is really quiet. It sounds like your mic is quiet too. Can you make sure to share the computer audio? Maybe put it back a few.
And Cheryl, if you also wouldn't mind clicking on that closed caption button that's down on the right-hand corner, that would be appreciated as well.
And organizational conditions. These are the nuts and bolts that are a part of any effective family and community engagement practice. The process conditions describe the key components of effective practice to build partnership, and the organizational conditions describe the systems and structures, in other words, the infrastructure needed to support and sustain partnership. One thing that the field stated loud and clear is that all partnerships have to start with trust. We know from the research of Tony Bragg and Barbara Schneider how important relational trust between families and educators is to the effective functioning of a school and to the building of dependable partnerships among the adults. So this was moved to the top of the list in the process conditions. The organizational conditions set the table for the effective execution of the process conditions. The next section highlights the type of growth we should see when all the essential conditions are met. These 4 C's are based on research from my colleague Monica Higgins. We all hear that term capacity building, but what does it actually mean? We know it's important for both sides to improve their knowledge and skills to engage in partnership. But Monica informs us that that's not the only element of capacity building that's important. Who you know, who you can turn to for information, is also an important part of capacity. We have research that reveals that our beliefs and values shift in positive ways as a result of working with others. Last but not least, the confidence of our families and educators to be able to do this work of partnership grows. And finally, in this last section, we see what happens when educators and families build their capacity to work in partnership with each other. We now have a reciprocal exchange that speaks to the power of both families and educators to support each other's continued growth. Educators connect family engagement to their day-to-day work with students and see families as contributors to their children's education. Families engage in various ways that make a big difference for their children's learning. And at the end of the day, we're able to see that this work truly helps us get to the outcome we're all striving for: more effective partnerships that support student and school improvement.
Okay, I feel really bad. I hope that you all didn't. I hope you all heard the first part of my presentation.
The video was really good, Cheryl. You are really quiet now.
Okay. How do I sound now?
Still quiet.
Oh, I'm not sure what to do.
That sounds a little better now. Just be close.
Okay, I'm not far, so.
Yeah, it sounds better now.
Okay. Sorry, I'm never someone who's described as being quiet, so this is very new to me. So all of this to say, everything that we've talked about, again, for those who just came in, those who never heard anything I said and I didn't realize that, we're just introducing different frameworks that you can look at when we're talking about family engagement. There are things that we've done that are lower capacity and higher capacity. This is the dual capacity framework. That dual means that it's both families and teachers, and as we learned from our definition, also communities, and recognizing that a lot of teachers are not coming to schools knowing how to effectively become partners with families. A lot of teachers do not know how to become effective partners with families. And so it's up to us to provide training. The third family engagement framework that I wanted to share with you is that family engagement needs to be grounded in trust. A lot of times our educators know how to do this piece. They know how to teach the babies. They know how to do the circle time. They know how to do the letter of the day or the letter of the week, the color of the week. They know how to do those things. But when it comes to really building trust with families, that is lacking. And it was really interesting, again, in my experience of being a mother of a preschooler, you know, with masks and everything, I literally recognized that if I saw my child's preschool teacher on the street, I would not know who either of them were. I really wouldn't, because I just don't even know what they look like. And so there's a little bit of this like weirdness, like, okay, I want to trust this person. They have my baby for many hours of the day. But we need to make sure there is ongoing communication and grounded in trust. So what keeps educators from creating relationships of trust with our families? So I want you to think, in your experience, what has kept you from creating relationships of trust? Okay, let's go ahead and have maybe 2 volunteers go ahead and speak up. Think about your experience, or maybe not even yours, maybe other educators that you've seen that seem to like really have a hard time with creating trust with families. Why do you think that is?
I personally tend to feel awkward talking to
Kara, you're really quiet.
I'll repeat what she says.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just feel kind of awkward talking to the parents.
Okay.
Awkward, and I don't know how to communicate with them.
Yeah, and I actually
feeling
really
about it.
appreciate you sharing that. Like, this is awkward for me. I don't really know how to do that. And honestly, some people are totally great with like 3-year-olds, but when it comes to like a 30-year-old adult, they like really shut down. Yes, that happens. Any other thoughts about what keeps us as educators from creating relationships of trust with our families?
You have a couple comments in the quote or in the chat that a lot of people say time. But my comment was privacy. A lot of times at preschool, all parents are there at one time, everyone's there. And when you want to try and talk to that person or the parent about their child, you can't. It's just not a private time to do so. And it's awkward to say, hey, could we like meet together? And then everyone's like, ooh, why are they meeting?
Meeting together, yep. Oh, I love this. And you know, it's funny because I knew that. So what I did with my preschooler is I asked to meet their teachers before I enrolled him. And I was like, yeah, so you're not gonna get my money until I know who you guys are. But again, I know that advocacy work. I know how to do this, right? I know how to say, these are some of my concerns. Also, when I'm looking at some of the books in your classroom, very few of the characters are children of color, and my child is a child of color. I want him to be able to pick up books where he can see himself. Is that okay that I go ahead and purchase some books for your classroom, right? Like, so we had that conversation, but you're right, Ellen, it is really awkward to sometimes pull families to the side. And to those who said time is a huge, huge one. But we've actually learned from our research, the biggest barrier is our assumptions. We assume sometimes that families don't want to engage with us. We assume that they feel like we're awkward. We assume that all of these things, and our assumptions are based on our biases. We have our explicit biases. Those are our conscious biases that we are okay with sharing to the world. Like, hey, I think motorcycles are the best for environment. They are the best for fuel. Those who don't drive a motorcycle and they're deciding to drive like a car or a huge truck are ruining the environment, right? This is an example of an explicit bias that people may share on their social media, and that is what they feel and believe based on their experiences. But it's this implicit bias that I want us to unpack a little bit more. As you can see, that iceberg underneath, there's a lot below the surface. Like, what are we thinking about when families are around us? I want us to understand that everyone has implicit bias. The implicit associations we hold do not necessarily align with our declared beliefs or even reflect stances we would explicitly endorse. This is really important. I recall having a conversation with my friend who was raised with a racist grandfather. And because she heard that narrative a lot, she was frustrated. She's like, Cheryl, I don't believe these things, but these are things that I heard growing up. So when I step into a certain space, I think certain things. And so that was really important for her to recognize, like, I have these biases. What am I going to do with them, even though I don't believe them? And we generally tend to hold implicit biases that favor our own in-group or that are influenced by societal norms. And I want to give you just a few ways to think about this. You may think of a pilot, for example, looking like this, a white male, right? Because in your societal norm, this is what a pilot looks like. And you may be surprised when you have a female pilot. This has happened to me. It is not because I do not believe females cannot be pilots. It's just that my societal norm is this first pilot is what I thought a pilot looks like. So when I was on a plane once and heard my pilot's voice and she spoke up, I said, oh, wow, okay, that's right. Like, all people can be pilots. For you, a preschool teacher may look like this person here, and you may be surprised when you go and your preschool teacher looks like this person here. Okay, so all of this is based on our biases, but implicit biases are malleable, and we can influence them by checking our assumptions and seeking more information. I want us to look how implicit bias and PB&J, yes, as in peanut butter and jelly, are connected. So for those of you who want to understand implicit bias, and if you are struggling with implicit bias as an educator.
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias. Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias
Cheryl, will you turn on
went
the
somewhat
chat?
mainstream. Yeah, so when
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias. Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there is an overrepresentation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem.
One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's the scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
Oh man, I get something new out of that one as well every time I watch it. Because again, we all have biases, and I think about my own and what I'm doing to lean into them, right? So I want you to think, if you're an educator, so this one was really related to implicit bias connected with race. I want you to think, if you're someone at a preschool where all of your students are the same race, and that same race is your race, okay? So we're in Utah, so I'm gonna just name it very directly. You're a white teacher and all of your kids are white. You can still have implicit bias. You can have these mental shortcomings about the way kids dress and associating with how much parents are taking care of their children. You can have implicit bias based on education level. You can have implicit bias on a lot of different things. I was having a training with an elementary school in a pretty rural community here in Utah, and a teacher raised her hand and said, I really appreciate that, because sometimes when I see, like, for example, the last name, let's say Anderson, for her, she's been like, oh, this child's in Anderson. They will be a great student because they had another Anderson before. But she's also has seen Anderson and been like, oh, I've taught their sibling. Oh, here we go again, right? Before giving that second child even a chance. So let's really think like, okay, we all have biases, but what are you doing to lean into them so that you are not judging families and stopping relationships from growing before they even have a chance to? So, what do schools do to engage families? Here are a list of different activities. I wonder if any of these lists look familiar to you. This comes from that US Department of Education framework we talked about earlier. And some of these strategies have high impact, and some of them have lower impact on student achievement. So as we can see, it's a continuum. There are things that we've always done as schools that were like, this is how we engage families, but we need to dig deeper. Are those the things that are actually working? So again, going back to this, I want us to first recognize that the language from the US Department of Education changed from parent involvement to family engagement. We know that all of our kiddos are not being raised by parents. We know what it's like to maybe be involved with someone versus engaged to someone. Engagement is a deeper commitment than someone who's maybe involved with someone else. So this is the language we need to be using, family engagement. And family engagement practices, again, as a reminder, should be relational. They build capacity of families and staff and be linked to learning. So again, look at all of these things here: home visits, data sharing, modeling of learning supporting strategies, parents helping learning projects, classroom observations, not being afraid for families to observe your classroom. I love that our preschool has a camera, so I check in to see what they're doing. Positive phone calls home, regular personalized communication, goal setting, and talks. And it's really important that we understand that parents and teachers are teams because the student learning time is very short. This is based on 6 hours of instruction, 180 days per year, and 8 hours of sleep every day. So think about if you're at a preschool where you're only teaching 2 hours, this would be even less school time. But 55% of the time kids are away from school, 33% of the time they should be sleeping, and 12% is only at school. So the time that we have with them is really short, and we need to make the best of it. So a current evidence-based family engagement strategy that we are doing at the Utah State Board of Education and around the state are parent-teacher home visits. If you know the research around home visits reduce absenteeism. There's fewer suspensions and expulsions. They improve communication between home and school, share accountability, improve test scores. Remember when we said that family engagement needed to be grounded in trust? And remember when some people said, you know, I feel nervous to talk to families, especially when there are a lot of families around, it feels very awkward. Home visits gives you that one-on-one time to really talk with families. It's so interesting that I train on this because I was thinking to myself, again, as a mother of a preschooler, how much I would have loved a home visit, how much I would have loved the teachers to sit and chat with me and say, you know, what are Hamilton's interests? What are some of the things that you want from Hamilton this year? What are some goals? Let's focus on that. And under this model, the visits last 30 minutes and are voluntary for everyone, teachers and families. Educators are trained and they are paid for their time. Educators go out in pairs, so educators do not go alone. All students are visited. So there's no negative targeting. It's not just for our students that we feel like are struggling, or even our students that we just love to be around. It's for a cross section of students. And finally, the visits focus on shared vision and values for success of students. I've linked a video here that you can take a look at on your own time. But again, it just shows this model in practice and what it looks like. And if you are interested in your school receiving training, I can train you. The training is free of cost, but I do ask that the school has money to pay our educators, because educators need or are doing this on extra time away from their families and the things that they're doing outside the school. So if this is something you're interested in, please reach out to me. And again, the non-negotiables are that visits are voluntary for all, educators are trained and compensated, we don't target students, we share hopes and dreams, and educators go in pairs and reflect. All right, so when we are doing the home visits, we are building trust. We're getting to know each other. Educators share a bit about themselves and ask families and students to share as well. We elevate hopes and dreams. Educators should explicitly ask a family what their hopes and dreams are for their child for both the upcoming school year and in the future. And students should actively share their hopes and dreams as well during secondary grade visits calls. So that's for older kids, right? Our babies don't really have the language to say everything, but some do, right? Our 4 and 5-year-olds generally can say, you know, I would like to, but again, that doesn't need to be pushed. It can be talked with families. Share expectations. Educators should plan to share one expectation they have for the student or family and invite a family to share one expectation they have for them as a teacher. Because we could have a whole laundry list of things that we expect, but just come with one expectation. Confirm communication preferences. Educators should make note of families' preferred method of communication moving forward and share any communication tools or guidelines they plan to leverage so the family is aware. Invitation to strengthen the relationship, whether it be an opportunity to connect at the school, a follow-up phone call, or something else. Educators should let the family know that lines of communication are open and that the relationships will continue to grow moving forward. And finally, be authentic. It's important for educators to be open and genuine during visits or calls with families and students. So again, to my teacher who spoke up, said, Cheryl, I feel a little bit awkward. That's okay. If that's who you are, go there. Just be like, you know, this is hard for me to be here, but I want to create a relationship with you. Families are just so happy that you're trying. For additional resources, Dr. Karen Mapp has a wonderful book, Powerful Partnership, A Teacher's Guide to Engaging Families for Student Success. Here's some other additional resources of different models that you can take a look at another time. I put all the different models in the different descriptions. I will leave my contact at the end of this. So if you have any questions like, Cheryl, I want to learn a little bit more about Ready Rosie, I can have that conversation with you. Also, I encourage your educators to do the free family engagement edX through the Harvard School of Education. Dr. Karen Mapp, I just screenshotted this one. So where it says enroll starts June 29th, that's from when I screenshotted it. But basically it's a 6-week course. It's free. You can have a verified certificate for $70 from Harvard if you so choose. But it's basically really helping educators know how to do those family engagement practices, especially because educators are not coming to the field knowing how to engage families. So I finally wanted to end my presentation with talking about family engagement in relation to Utah. So I had an opportunity to do a whole family engagement fellowship where I really got to go around the state and really look from San Juan to Box Elder, really understand family engagement in Utah. And I want to point out a few. These are just some pictures that represent Utah, but there are a few that I want to point out to you. First of all, that we are a state that has five tribes, indigenous tribes. And that's important to understand because not all of our indigenous tribes feel welcome and close with us as educators. And I'll explain some historical context to that in a minute. That there is a dominant faith here, and whether or not you're a part of the faith, to understand that this faith really has families as a big value of an institution of the faith. And so families look and feel a certain way, the church does promote that families are the most important foundation of a whole groups of people. So really understanding that. I also want us to turn and look at this LGBTQ flag, that Salt Lake City has the largest number of same-sex couples who have families. So whatever our families look like, we need to be engaging them in the schools. So let's take a look at some history and current day relations between home and school. Remember when I talked about the 5 recognized tribes in Utah and why there's a little bit of trust issues? We need to understand that we have a history where, first of all, that Utah was Mexico, and then there were borders that were changed. So when people talk a lot about border issues, we have got to understand that this was a territory first and that it changed, okay? And then also with our indigenous tribes, I mean, some of you in here might have even experienced this, where there was the Indian placement program where there were indigenous children put in families that were not indigenous so that they could have a different experience outside of the reservation. Now, why I'm bringing this up is because when we did our research, there were indigenous people who said that was the worst experience of my life. My culture was stripped of me. I felt degraded. It was a horrible experience. On the flip side, we also learned that there were people who said that experience was one of the best experiences for me because I learned a life outside of the reservation and it just gave me a different perspective. But it was important to understand why some of our indigenous families may feel this trust issues, because grandparents were some of these kids that went through this Indian placement program. So we've got to understand that. We had a huge growth between 2000 and 2010. So I'm excited to get our census back so I can update this data. But look how much we've grown in race and ethnicities in Utah, just so we know that in 2017, Utah was the fastest growing state in the United States. So with a lot of growth comes a lot of different kinds of people and different kinds of perspectives than may have been traditionally in Utah, which is a very like Scandinavian white background. That's why you hear a lot of names like Jensens, Christiansens, Sorensens, because of that Scandinavian background. But we have a lot of different cultures and races joining this state with the tech boom. We have a large Indian population growing, so it's wonderful. Obviously, I'm a person who promotes diversity, but we've got to recognize as educators, what does that mean? Going back to my own experience as a parent, do you have books in your classroom where kids, I don't even care if all of your kids are white, but where they can go and pick a book where characters are different colors than them? So they're exposed to all different kinds of children and people. I think I hear the narrative a lot. Well, kids don't really see race. Oh, I am going to tell you right now that is not true. My son picks up a book all the time. It's this book about hair, and he calls the main character a Black woman. He looks at her and he always says, "Mama." So obviously he sees that that person looks like me in some kind of way. I want us to take a look at this map. This map is specifically Salt Lake County, and where it's more brown or darker tones, we have a higher population of families of color. This word here that we use in here from 2011 to 2015 was minority. I no longer use that word minority, especially because the connotation of minority first means like less than, and we don't want our children of color to ever feel that way. But as you can see, that the more west we go in Salt Lake, the more brown it gets, more families of color. This is not random. If you look down this line here, this is actually I-15. And why I bring that to your attention is because there was some redlining that happened when Salt Lake happened. There were people who moved in for all different kinds of reasons, different races, that were not allowed to live on the east side of Salt Lake. And so that's why you have a lot more families of color on the west side. I want to draw attention to the Utah Compact. This is a declaration of 5 principles to guide Utah's immigration discussion. In Utah, we said that strong families are the foundation of successful communities. We oppose policies that unnecessarily separate families. We champion policies that support families and improve the health, education, and well-being of Utah children. So no, this is what our state feels, and I hope as an educator, you also feel that way too. So we went about our learning by interviewing lots and lots of families, teachers, parents, students, legislators. We did a lot of focus on Salt Lake and Granite schools because they were close by. But again, for our Indigenous populations, we did go farther. And as time has gone on, I've gotten some more research from, again, San Juan to Box Elder. We analyzed our data. We worked with coaches to analyze transcripts and notes into themes. We dug deep into each theme to find valuable insights. We challenged one another to consider different perspectives, interpretations, and remember the gaps in our data. And we developed our user needs statements. So I want to kind of wrap it up with some of the things that we learned. So again, if you're just joining us, this is research that we found here in Utah in relation to family engagement. So again, I can give you a lot of national data, but a lot of times it's like, okay, what's going on here in Utah? Here are 3 user needs statements that I hope you know and really take to heart because it can help you decide, are we being engaging in our school? A huge theme that came out was around welcoming and valuing. School faculty and staff need to make the goal of welcoming and valuing families as an integrated part of everyone's job, because a sense of unwelcome is developed through everyday personal interactions that carry large meaning. So again, I'm going back to some of the examples we said. You may feel shy, you may feel awkward to talk to families. Dig deep, do it anyway. You may feel like, where do I find the time? How do I pull the family out in the crowd? Do it anyway. This allows families to feel welcome. It allows families to feel valued. Reciprocal learning. Educators and families need opportunities to learn from and about one another, their priorities, their context, their definitions of family-school collaboration in ways that shift power imbalances, because there are too many assumptions being made on the absence of knowledge and relationships. Okay, and again, I'm going to go back to my example of buying the multicultural, multi-race book for my kids' preschool class. I also added some multicultural construction paper because I said, you know what, I want, when he's like doing projects, I want him to pick out colors that represent him. I also added Starbucks gift cards just because I also want to be on the good side of these teachers. I don't want to overstep my boundaries by any way, but at the same time, those teachers, and they did a great job of saying, no, I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you for pushing our knowledge. Thank you for thinking of these things, right? There was reciprocal learning from both of us on both sides. Finally, impact. Families need to experience their engagement of whatever kind having an impact, because it demonstrates that schools value families' knowledge and capacity and create space for relationships to form. Why this is important to understand is that not all families can volunteer. You might not even see all parents being the ones for pickup, right? You might see a brother, sister, auntie, uncle, grandpa, grandma, whatever. But whatever way a family can engage, let them see their impact. Like something that they ask, do it so that they feel comfortable in your school setting. So we are moving forward as a state with this initiative, and we're calling it the Belonging Schools in Utah, and it's a way to engage families in challenging times. And we're taking our 3 user needs statements, and this is a plan for advancing equity through family engagement with Utah schools. And recruitment is starting right now, and we want different leaders. So if you're a preschool leader out there saying, you know, I want to be a part of this, please email me, because we want leaders of family engagement statewide to begin meeting bi-monthly basis to discuss and catalog family engagement best practices for Utah schools. if you're a teacher out there saying, I want to be able to better engage families in our specific context, recruitment for teachers begins April 2021, but please have your, please email me, because I want to know if you're a teacher that would be interested in this, right? Because again, looking at our definition, it was from preschool to college and career when we're talking about family engagement. So this is my information. I do want you to write it down. I'm going to take a minute to get questions or thoughts and comments from you. It's 10:01, but I didn't start right at 9. So we'll just give like a few minutes. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. And I would love to take some questions or comments or thoughts.
Cheryl, I was thinking during your presentation and stuff of how far we can expand this on. I know your personal experience was with your child in his classroom and not having the diversity of color and stuff in there for him. But I was thinking how far we can take it of just with disabilities or kids with wheelchairs or kids with, glasses, all of that type of stuff, how far this engagement and how that bias that you pointed out, kids that smell, type of thing, they come because they wet the bed and they didn't get changed. And then we just have that instant, like, oh, parents don't take care of them type of thought. But how far this goes, it's not just like a one category type thing.
Absolutely. And I hope I didn't come across as seeming that this was only one way. I just think giving an example really
sorry, didn't mean to make you feel
oh yeah, okay. It really helps. But Ellen, I really love that you pushed it to disabilities. You pushed it to all different ways that we can have bias to our families, and like how we really want to like push our thinking, because again, I cannot reiterate this enough. When families have a good experience with preschool, with engagement, they feel more empowered. This is what we learned from our research. They feel more empowered to engage later on as well. Any other thoughts or comments?
Cheryl?
Yes.
This is Beverly Martinez. I'm the preschool coordinator down in Carbon School District.
Yes, ma'am.
And can you talk a little bit about what you see as far as funding? I previously have worked in a Head Start program where parent involvement is funded by the federal government. And we in Utah, when we're state funded, Utah struggles so hard to fund education in general that as a coordinator, I have a real hard time figuring out where to get funding to allow teachers to do more parent involvement without feeling like this is one more thing I have to do when I have so much to do already. Does that make sense?
So where I get my funding is either Title I or special education. I don't know how that connects to preschool, so I need to figure that out. But the person that you also want to maybe you want to chime in on this, Jessica, what kind of funding is available? Let's say if preschools wanted to do family engagement, namely home visits, and pay their teachers, or to have opportunities to do more family engagement. What kind of funding is available?
So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for that. We're kind of bare bones right now where it comes to preschool funding. But I will say that we continue to advocate for more funding, and especially with the school readiness grants, parent engagement, as well as, having a classroom that represents diversity are those elements of high quality. And so as those things come about, we'll continue to push for those and for more funding. What I would like to do is to kind of work together to gather some like free resources of, just finding some Google images and printing those off and hanging them up in your classroom, or using those Scholastic dollars to find books that represent all of your students. And then with family engagement, just continuing to have communication on those creative ideas on what we can do to interact with families. And I think the pandemic has helped us to maybe, utilize Zoom more than we would have. And that kind of can count less in your travel time. But I would love to continue conversations on how we can be inventive during this time where we have minimal funding.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. I appreciate your time. I see that there's a lot in the chat. I believe that you all were chatting with each other. I'm not sure. So Jessica, if there was anything that I need to respond to at another time, please let me know.
The only thing is that they wanted to make sure that your slides were going to be in the Google folder. So if you could the Google folder, they'd love to see those.
So how will I get that? I'll send it to you, Jessica, and then you'll upload it. Okay. Perfect. I'll get that to you. And please watch the video on home visits. I think that will help you all to see that a little bit better. I really appreciate all of you. I'm gonna hop off right now because I actually have someone who's watching my children. So, and she has a meeting that she needs to go to. So thank you so much for everything.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl, for coming, and thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see you in our breakout rooms. Bye.
Bye.